Aloha and welcome. Today we're doing the Maunalua Bay Past, Present, Future, a monthly show brought to you by the Livable Hawaii Kai Hui. Today's episode is the Friends of Hanauma Bay, and with me today I have Lisa Bishop, President of the Friends, Alan Hong, a former manager of the Hanauma Bay, and Robin Bond, the author of the management plan. So we'll just take a minute to introduce each of you, and if you'd provide us with some information about what your connection is to the Bay.
Well, thank you, Natalie. I'm a retired naval officer, and my husband and I decided to come back to Hawaii and retire here about 9 years ago. And I started off in my relationship with Hanauma Bay as being a volunteer with the Hanauma Bay Education Program. While doing that, I met some members of the Friends of Hanauma Bay, and they asked me to come and join their organization, and I'm very happy to have done so.
Thank you, Lisa. Alan?
Well, my introduction to Hanauma Bay was when I was a college student. I helped run snorkeling activities there for the outdoor recreation program. That was back in 1972. And then ran scuba diving tours in the commercial industry at Hanauma Bay. And then eventually started working for the Parks Department in ocean recreation, where I did various ocean recreation programs, including snorkeling and water safety programs at Hanauma Bay for 14 years before becoming manager in 1990.
Interesting. Thank you, Alan. And Robin?
I lived in Hawaii Kai for most of my life, and I worked for the Department of Parks and Recreation for about 15 years, and included the managing Hanauma Bay. And so that's where I got my start with the Bay itself. And I was asked to do the management plan, and I was appreciative of doing that.
Well, good. I'm very excited to learn more about the Bay today. And I understand, Alan, you brought some pictures with you.
I did, a few.
So we can take a look at those.
Well, this is an overview of Hanauma Bay. It's the inside of a volcanic crater located on the southeast end of Oahu. This was before it became a marine life conservation district and nature preserve. And this is actually a trench that was dug across the beach and then along the bottom of the ocean, and eventually a channel was blasted through the reef in the late 50s, early 60s to lay telephone cables. And this is a photograph of some of the problems we had at Hanauma Bay. This picture shows kind of a low tide, and there are 100 people in the water when this photograph was taken, and 49 of those 100 people happened to be trampling on the reef, which is quite damaging to the ecosystem there. This is a close-up of people walking on the reef, and a good portion of the people had inflatable tubes, so they kind of looked at Hanauma Bay more in terms of it being an amusement park type of environment rather than a marine life conservation district. So the city decided we needed to restrict the number of people, and for those that did get in, we had to have some type of educational program so that each visitor would know how they should behave to reduce their impact. And this is a photograph of our visitor center, our education center there. And we engaged the community to help us with a lot of the things, such as community groups and schools and individuals helping with litter cleanups and other type of projects that we have going on at Hanauma Bay.
Great, thank you. I think that's a wonderful introduction, and people who've lived on Oahu will probably recognize some of those pictures from years ago. But Lisa, would you just give us a brief overview of what the Friends are and how they came to be and what they do?
Sure, thank you. The Friends started off as a grassroots organization that were concerned with the damage that was being done to Hanauma Bay by the great number of tourists and other visitors that were coming to Hanauma Bay in the late 1980s or so. And so the interested and concerned members of the community got together, and they supported the development and the implementation of the 1990 management plan. And shortly thereafter were constituted as the Friends of Hanauma Bay. In 1991, we joined in a contract with Department of Parks and Recreation, and we became the official adopting organization of Hanauma Bay. So we are the Adopt-A-Park organization. And later on, we evolved into becoming a 501c3 nonprofit, totally volunteer-based organization. So some of the things that we do for Hanauma Bay are, first of all, we try to help with the Hanauma Bay education program as much as we can, as well as we help the management of the Bay with any problems that they might have. We also are the voice of advocacy for Hanauma Bay, for conservation advocacy for the Bay. And there are many issues that come up from time to time, from management to operations to maintenance to funding. And these concerns we bring to the forefront of the Department of Parks and Recreation, Department of Land and Natural Resources, the neighborhood boards, city council members, as well as other elected officials to try to get them done. So we are really focused on preserving and protecting Hanauma Bay.
Well, that's a good segue into my next question, because the Hanauma Bay now is recognized as a preserve. So Alan, can you give us some information on that? What does that entail, and what does that mean?
Well, the property of Hanauma Bay was actually deeded to the city by Bishop's Estate back in 1927. I don't know when it actually became a beach park, but the original name was Hanauma Bay Beach Park. When the management plan was being developed, the city council decided that there needed to be a designation that gave it more significance and protection, so then they named it Hanauma Bay Nature Park, and then very shortly after that it became Hanauma Bay Nature Preserve. And the title of a nature preserve helps set the mood for somebody coming to visit Hanauma Bay, that it's not just your typical beach park, it is a nature preserve, and your conduct should be that's appropriate to a preserve and not your typical beach park where you can be playing beach volleyball and barbecuing and things like that. I need to clarify something, that the water at Hanauma Bay belongs to the state,
Yes.
as all the waters throughout Hawaii. The land portion of it belongs to the city government under the Department of Parks and Recreation. So the management plan that was put into place was actually meant to address concerns that were occurring in the water, state property. But because the city is the one that can most easily control access to visitors trying to get to the water, and can also interact and dialogue with these visitors, the city took it upon themselves to develop the management plan to promote the preservation of the water portion of the bay.
Oh, very good. Thank you. So, Robin, you're the one who created the management plan. Would you tell us some more background on that and what's involved with that?
Well, it started in the late '80s when the use of Hanauma Bay it went up to like what 3 million a year.
3.4 in '88.
3.4, and it was just being overrun. I had people working there that would have to get in to do their work in the dark, because if they didn't, their cars would be locked in by the other cars that were parking everywhere. Well, I was asked if I would help do that master plan, and I said certainly I would. And it was new to me doing a master plan like that, and I went and I checked the number of different areas about how they did it, and I got the idea that why don't we just write a master plan? A management plan, and then use the management plan, circulate it to people, and what we did was we circulated it to a lot of different people and asked them if they have if they don't like it or if there's something wrong with it, to get back to us. And there wasn't anybody that got back to us. And so it got approval by the council and by the mayor, and in July it was approved to go out, and it had things in there. There were like about 8 or 9 different items that had to be addressed. Hiring a manager was one of them. Doing some changes with the cesspools and the sewer lines and stuff of that nature. But there were a bunch of things that were done, and the last one was the education. Complex, and that was done in the early 2000s, and basically that's been done. But what we need to do is we need to dust it off and keep it going and improve it a little bit as it needs to be improved.
Right, so one of the things that struck me is how big the plan is, and you have a copy with you today, right?
Sure.
How many pages is the plan?
It's 14 pages.
14 pages, so less than 20 pages, and it's
Right.
been very effective. Am I right on that? So,
Yes.
Alan, can you give us some the results of the plan itself?
Okay, well, one of the major issues and concerns at that time was the massive overcrowding that was occurring at Hanauma Bay. It was coming out in the newspapers, people voicing their concern of the damage that the massive hordes of people were causing. So the management plan said, well, we've got to reduce the number of people, and that means we're going to restrict how many people we let in, and it outlined how they would do this, these restrictions. And then the major way was, fortunately at that time, the University of Hawaii, Natalie, was doing a 6-month study out at Hanauma Bay, on a user survey. And one of the things that they told us was your typical visitor got there via one of the 70-something different tour companies that were shuttling people out to Hanauma Bay. And they identified each of these companies, what time they came in, how many passengers they dropped off and left to go and pick up their next load. And when you crunch the data, it turned out to be one bus load averaging 42 passengers being dropped off every 57 seconds. And they were each handed a bento plate, a beach mat, and snorkeling gear and sent on their merry way while the bus ran back to Waikiki to pick up their next load. So looking at this information, it was really clear that Hanauma Bay, which at the time did not have an admission fee, and it was a totally taxpayer-supported facility, it was clear that the residents should have the highest priority for getting in, and that being so, the toughest restrictions should be applied to these 70-something different commercial operators that were overusing a public facility at no cost for their private profit. And so the management plan said we're going to ban all these tour buses from dropping off starting in July of 1990. And that in fact was probably the most effective part of the management plan in reducing direct impact to the bay. The other things in reducing the number of people is when the parking lot filled up, we no longer let people park all over the grass and all over the roadway and all over the highway. We shut down the parking lot and didn't let cars in until spaces became available, because a parking lot is a really good way of controlling how many people are on your premise at once. The state also really cooperated with us by putting up a lot of no parking signs along the highway,
Right.
just so drivers would be informed that you cannot park up there or else your car would be towed away. So reducing the number of people the very first year, we went from 3 million visitors a year to 1.4 million
Wow.
visitors a year. A 50% reduction in attendance down to the beach. And each year we're able to get it a little bit lower, a little bit lower, and a little bit lower. When I retired, it was around 800,000 people a year going down to the beach. But that was almost 5 years ago. I don't know what the counts are now. But tourism is increasing every year here on our island, so I imagine the counts are going to start creeping back up. And the other part of the management plan said for those people that get in, we've got to educate them so that they will minimize their damage. And the plan actually said the best way to do that is to build an education center and make everybody go through it before they get down to the beach. And so we were able to accomplish that and open up our visitor center in 2002.
Right, so that's a very effective plan then, and I understand it was recognized internationally as well.
Oh yes. In the late 90s, we won an international award put on, at that time, by British Airways. It had different sponsors before that. And this award was to recognize destinations that have taken massive action to preserve or restore unique visitor destinations so that it will be enjoyed by future generations. It's called the Tourism for Tomorrow Award. And they had different categories where they're recognized in different organizations. And Hanauma Bay won in 3 different categories, which was the first time in the 20-something years of this program that one destination has won more than one award. So we wanted a grand award plus 2 other awards, and it was to recognize the cooperation between the Friends of Hanauma Bay, the Hanauma Bay Education Program, which is actually part of the University of Hawaii Sea Grant programs, and the city administration, and all working closely together to reduce the damage that was occurring at Hanauma Bay.
That's really quite great. That's a great acknowledgement of the work that was done with the Bay and the Friends that helping out. So you mentioned initially that it was all funded by taxpayer money, but now we know that there are fees. And Lisa, would you like to give us some information on the revenue that's generated by the Bay?
Last fiscal year, Hanauma Bay generated about $6.5 million in revenue, and that came from the fees for admission as well as parking, and the rentals from the 4 concessions that are authorized to be at Hanauma Bay. The gift shop, the food concession, the snorkel concession, and the tram service. So that money is supposed to be used for the operation, maintenance, and improvement of Hanauma Bay, to support the education and other kinds of visitor information programs that we have there, and also to conduct annual carrying capacity studies or health of the reef environmental studies. Now the Department of Budget and Fiscal Services administers the Hanauma Bay Fund, and the Department of Parks and Recreation is responsible for operating, maintaining, and improving the nature preserve itself. One of the things that has come up, not too frequently, but frequently enough, is that I just wanted to clarify that the Friends of Hanauma Bay do not operate, manage, or administer either the Hanauma Bay Fund or the Hanauma Bay Nature Preserve. Those entities are run by the City and County of Honolulu. We are simply advocates for the Bay.
And you've been very good advocates in watching out with City Council and what's been happening with the money.
Thank you.
So speaking of advocates and watching out, most recently you presented a concern to the Hawaii Kai Neighborhood Board regarding a proposal to have a transportation company come in and be exclusive visitor drop-off people. So would you tell us some more information about that and how that happened and what the status is?
Well, sure. As Alan mentioned, tourism is the #1 industry in Hawaii, and Hanauma Bay is an internationally renowned, iconic symbol of Oahu, or perhaps Hawaii as well. And so the more tourists, the more visitors we bring to the islands, the more people want to come and visit Hanauma Bay. And as was in effect before the 1990 management plan was implemented, there were huge numbers of tour companies that were making a profit from satisfying a consumer demand. They had customers who wanted to come to Hanauma Bay, and those tour companies supported that. Well, that hasn't changed. The more visitors we have, the more people want to come to Hanauma Bay, so that tension is always there between the tour industry and the conservation efforts of the Department of Parks and Recreation and the City and County of Honolulu to preserve Hanauma Bay. So this is not the first attempt since 1990. It will not be the last attempt. So there is a great opportunity for a lot of financial gain to exploit Hanauma Bay. And the Friends of Hanauma Bay are mostly concerned about the conservation aspects of it. And we know that from the management plan and from what resulted from the management plan, the best thing we can do to protect and preserve Hanauma Bay is to reduce the number of visitors and not increase them on an annual basis. Right. So it's not going to be the first attempt. There will be others.
Well, that's actually a healthy attitude to have, I think. Robin, do you have anything to add about that? Any solutions as far as keeping the balance in that issue?
It's an ongoing fight. It really is. Excuse me. It happens all the time. People find a niche and they'll try to go out and they'll try to come up with some way of getting in to make money over there. And really it's an ongoing fight. Alan's been doing it for 20-something years, and he always calls me up and says, hey, we got this happening now, so let's get back and start getting into the fight again to keep the bay being what it is. And you have a lot more information on that than I do. So
Did you want to add anything to that, Alan?
Well, the management plan went into effect over 25 years ago.
Hmm?
So there's a whole new generation that was not around when all
True.
the threats to the bay were being recognized and the management plan was devised to address these threats. So I think today's public needs to be kind of exposed to what happened in the past and why the management plan was put into place and is still effective now. The coral is recovering, but it has not developed the ability to withstand 3 million visitors a year all of a sudden. So we just have to accept the fact we can't let in everybody that wants to get in. Even as tourism continues to grow in our island, we can't say, well, we've got more tourists, we therefore have to let more people in, because it's a natural environment in which Mother Nature calls the shots as how the corals will recover and grow and stuff like that. And we can't go in there and change Mother Nature in that respect. So the management plan should be updated to address issues that we have today, but the basis of which the management plan is formed on, to minimize the number of visitors and those that do get in, keep them educated so that they can
Right.
be responsible stewards, that still very much applies. And we do hear a lot of complaints. People say, well, I tried to get in and I couldn't get in. Why don't you guys do something about it? There isn't anything we can do. We've got to minimize the number of people that we let in.
Right, and I think that's really important, and I think that's where a key point where the pictures come in handy in showing people how it was before the plan came into being.
Right.
Lisa, so can you tell us, does the Friends have any projects that you're working on right now?
We do actually. We're, as I mentioned, we're the organization that has the Adopt a Park contract with the Department of Parks and Recreation. And so we hold our quarterly cleanups at Hanauma Bay. We just completed one in February. Our next one is going to be on the 14th of May. And anybody and everybody is more than welcome to come and help us with that. We also have some, excuse me, we're also supporting the Hawaii State Science and Engineering Fair. We think it's very important to recognize the future scientists and environmentalists and marine biologists and chemists in our own state. And so the Friends of Hanauma Bay award a junior and a senior student, as well as their teachers, some recognition under the category of marine-related research. And the science fair is going to be the 28th through 30th of March, so that's coming up just at the end of this month. We're also going to be involved with Kaiser High School's Earth Day event on the 23rd, the 22nd of April, and with the Honolulu or the Waikiki Aquarium's Mauka to Makai event on the 23rd of April. So those are ongoing things that we have. Plus, we're working with some of our elected officials to try to improve the process by which public school children can visit Hanauma Bay as part of their school project or on a field trip. Right now the process is very lengthy and it requires signature from the governor to allow third grade class in Cocoa Head Elementary to go to Hanauma Bay. So we're trying to make that a little easier so that the principals can directly liaise with the management at Hanauma Bay and get their classes to Hanauma Bay with a 1 or 2 week process instead of a year-long process. So
you guys are very, very busy. So I just want to point out this show will be airing in May, and some of the things that you mentioned are in March and April. Are they things that you do annually so people can maybe make a note of that for next year?
Oh yes, our quarterly cleanups are quarterly. The next one's going to be in May. We're hoping to be invited back to the Mauka and Makai event next year. I'm fairly sure that we're going to be able to be coming back to Kaiser High School. It depends on what their plans are as well.
Okay.
And to the science fair, of course. Yes, so these are, plus we've also started to offer field trips for members of the Friends of Hanauma Bay, and we're going to be going to NOAA to see their new facility on Ford Island next week. So we're going to have 2 or 3 of those events every year as well.
Oh, very interesting. Well, we're coming down to the last 2.5 minutes of the show, so there was some interest in knowing what you folks have planned for like the next 10 years or what you see as happening at the Bay. You want to start with that, Robin?
Basically, it's just to try to make sure that we get the management plan updated and get it current as best we can, so it goes. It's a living document as opposed to something that sits on a shelf. And if anybody wants it, I guess they can get that through. Can they get it through the Friends?
Sure, we'll be able to. We'll be putting it on our website, and they can just contact us, and we'll be happy to provide a copy.
Right. Okay.
Anything you'd like to add on that, Alan?
Well, the government place like Hanauma Bay, which actually belongs to the people of Hawaii, it's important that there be a community organization like the Friends that can be the community voice. Because without that, it's hard for government to just know what do the people really want and what needs to be done without some community guidance. So the Friends have been very, very supportive along that line. And when I was the manager, because I worked for the city, I had to support both the city, but also support the conservation of Hanauma Bay. And sometimes those two weren't always on the same wavelength. So there are many times that the Friends spoke up and really enlightened the people as to what needed to be done, or at other times what shouldn't be done at Hanauma Bay.
That's a very good point. Lisa?
Well, different viewpoints are healthy.
Yeah.
So everybody is really concerned about protecting and preserving the Bay, and we might have different approaches to doing it. So, but the important thing is to maintain that dialogue. One of the things I would like to see builds on what Alan mentioned earlier. I would like the membership of the Friends of Hanauma Bay not only to continue doing the work that we're doing, but to start getting members of the younger generation to join us, because unfortunately there are just a handful of, and I'm not even one of them, but there are a handful of people who are the corporate memory for the transition of Hanauma Bay from a park to a nature preserve, and we need younger people to join us.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank everybody today. We have so much more I'm sure we'd love to hear, but we have to end. And thank everybody for tuning in this afternoon, or today. Thank you.